Southwestern Scotland is visible on a clear day from County Antrim in Ireland's ancient province of Ulster. And it was from that part of the Emerald Isle that the Scots of Dalriada migrated to northern Great Britain, which we call Scotland, in the early 6th century. Scotland's proximity to Ulster encouraged both social, economic, and cultural interaction and frequent relocations between them. Within 100 years of the death of King James I in 1625, descendants of Ulster-Scots, or the Scotch-Irish as they were often called in America, were pioneers in the backcountry of colonial America, a place that we call Appalachia. Among the immaterial aspects of culture that they brought with them were relics of their political and religious past, including the practice of scaring kids with reminders that the boogeyman might get them if they weren't obedient to their parents. While cultures around the world feature some form of a mysterious beastie or man that could grab and harm wayward kids, the Appalachian version of the boogeyman, I argue, was in fact based on a real historical person. His name was John Graham, the 7th Laird of Claverhouse. Today on The Vantage Point, we are going to take a look at how John Graham, who was also known as Bloody Clavers, took on the legacy of the boogeyman. I hope you'll join us. The direction of those flows of humanity between Ireland and Scotland was greatly affected by the oftentimes uneven application of laws associated with life under distinct political authorities, prior to 1603 that is, and then by the slow but steady evolution of imperial political power after the union of crowns in that year. Elizabeth I died and James VI came to power. While 17th century movements of Scottish people to the north of Ireland were set in motion by King James I and VI Plantation of Ulster initiative, the king pushed the Anglicizing institution of religion, Protestant religion that is, to the forefront of everyday life. Moreover, James's insistence on controlling the church was set at odds with Irish Gaeldom's allegiance to Roman Catholicism and the aspirations among Ulster-Scots Presbyterians to establish an independent church polity, legitimized in part by congregational consent. The leaders of the emerging Presbyterian polity in Scotland were also espousers of a Puritan ethos. Puritanism was especially strong among the ministers and congregations that lived among the rolling green hills in the coastal boroughs or villages scattered along the north channel of the Irish Sea. The members of this expanding trans-channel community formed something of a social network through which chain migration and cultural diffusion could take place. The ethos of this community served as a prism which focused diverse push and pull forces into a framework that gave land on either side of the Irish Sea geotheological or Christian significance. As I observed in my book, In Search of Ulster-Scots Land, some Presbyterian historians, regardless of their nationality, regard those who were executed during the repressive killing times, the 1680s, as martyrs. Those who escaped persecution by migrating first to Ulster and then on to America have been seen as frontiersmen in the service of God. As a region away from the center of political power in Scotland, the rugged lands of the southwest, with its seaward orientation, were prone to harbor religious views that ran contrary to a monarch who was bent on pacifying the masses through episcopacy and his appointed bishops. He famously said, James did, "No bishop, no king." Contrary to popular belief among many Americans, autonomous Presbyterianism as a church polity was not established first in Scotland. It was actually started by Scottish ministers in Ulster in 1642, and it was firmly rooted in Puritanism. It was called the Army Presbytery. The theological bent along both shores of the Irish Sea was strict. Many dedicated members of Presbyterian communities often chose to meet for worship in outdoor, hard-to-reach places. Those meetings were called conventicles. Charles II and his brother James II saw those church gatherings as seditious, and they were outlawed by the Conventicle Act of 1644. Later in Appalachia, conventicles would be called field meetings. John Graham was unleashed on the dissenting Christians practicing their faith in the southwest of Scotland. Sword-wielding cavalry soldiers called dragoons hunted down pastors and their followers. Among the martyred leaders in the southwest of Scotland were Richard Cameron, who was killed or executed in 1680, and Donald Cargill, who was executed in 1681. Due to their ruthlessness in a short amount of time, Graham's dragoons were feared across the moorlands and glens of the southwestern part of the Scottish lowlands. One of the best remembered or infamous instances of the martyrdom of lay people, and which helped to galvanize the rise of the legend of Bloody Clavers, was the executions of the two Margarets, or the Wigton martyrs. In 1685, Margaret Wilson was only 18, and Margaret McLaughlin was a mature woman in her 60s. That's really old back then. Both women were tried as participants in a conventicle and for being present at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1679, which seems pretty unlikely because Margaret Wilson would have had to have been about 12 years old at that time. Meanwhile, two other women were tried. Agnes Wilson, Margaret's sister, was convicted, but her life was spared in exchange for a penalty of 100 quid or pounds. A 21-year-old servant for a local noble named Margaret Maxwell, another Margaret, was convicted and sentenced to 3 days of flogging. The Wilson sisters' father went to Edinburgh and pleaded with the Privy Council for mercy. The King's Council voted to overturn the penalty, but the local authorities under Graham were out for blood. The manner of their executions was unorthodox to say the least. According to a 2017 piece in the Scotsman, and I quote, "They were tied to palisades and fixed in the sand within the flood mark at the mouth of the Bloodknock stream, and there to stand till the flood flowed over them and drowned," end of quote. As the tide started to rise, the women were again asked to recant their positions. Neither of them did. Margaret Wilson, however, offered a prayer for the king, which apparently angered the attending soldiers. To show their disgust, they forced the young woman's head underneath the rising surf and sliced open her throat. Another soldier forced the elder Margaret beneath the rising tide, while he too severed her jugular vein. As the reputation of Graham's dragoons spread along the migration routes of the lowland Scots, they took their stories with them. In 1962, James G. Leburn wrote The Scotch-Irish, A Social History, which is arguably one of the best books ever written on the Scotch-Irish, or the Scots-Irish, or the Ulster-Scots. In his book, Leburn claims that Scotch-Irish settlers would often warn their children in America that if they didn't behave themselves, Clavers or Claverhouse would get them. The noted Scots-Irish linguist Michael Montgomery makes the same claim in his 2017 book titled From Ulster to America, The Scotch-Irish Heritage of the American English. In my books on the subject, I argued that it was easy to switch out Clavers with boogeyman. If I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times when I was growing up. "You kids better get in this house, or the boogeyman's gonna get you." I have no doubt that the late 17th century ancestors of the Scotch-Irish understood that Clavers was indeed the boogeyman. I hope you enjoyed today's show and will join us next time here on The Vantage Point. God bless you and yours. See you next time.